I didn't want to go to the party. That's the truth I need to start with, because everything that happened afterward came from that one reluctant decision on a cold December evening in Indianapolis. "Dad, you're coming tonight, right?" Derek had asked that morning, leaning against the doorframe of the guest house. He never came all the way inside anymore. "Courtney says it'll look weird if you don't show up." I was sitting at my small desk, working on a crossword puzzle, one of the many ways I filled the hours since Patricia died. "I don't want to be in the way," I said quietly. "You won't be in the way. Just be there by 7. Wear something decent." He left before I could respond. That was Derek's style now, brief, transactional, always somewhere else he needed to be. I sat there staring at the half-finished puzzle, feeling that familiar heaviness settle over me. Wear something decent. As if I'd forgotten how to dress myself. As if the man who once wore tailored suits to meetings with city mayors and corporate executives had somehow become a child again. I thought about Patricia. If she were still alive, she would have squeezed my hand and said, "Ray, hold your head up. You've got nothing to prove, but don't you dare shrink yourself for anyone." She always knew when I was letting the world make me smaller. God, I missed her. 2 years gone, and some mornings I still reached across the bed expecting to find her there. By 6:30, I was standing in front of the mirror in my best suit. Navy blue, a little loose now because I'd lost weight after Patricia passed. I knotted my tie 3 times before getting it right. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. 66 years old, and suddenly I felt every single one of them. Derek drove us to the Hotel Montclair downtown. He spent the entire 15-minute drive on a conference call, Bluetooth earpiece blinking, throwing around words like synergy and disrupt the vertical. I sat in the passenger seat watching the December lights blur past, wondering when my son had become someone I barely recognized. The ballroom was full of people half my age, maybe younger. Everyone held drinks with names I didn't know, wore clothes that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. I felt immediately out of place, like I'd walked into the wrong decade. Derek handed me a beer, at least that I understood, and disappeared into the crowd within 5 minutes. I found a spot near the windows and watched. That's what I'd gotten good at since Patricia died. Watching, staying quiet, taking up as little space as possible. A young woman with bright red hair, couldn't have been more than 30, struck up a conversation with me about the Indianapolis skyline. Her name was Alyssa, and she was genuinely kind, asking what I did for a living. "I'm retired," I said. "Used to work in construction and engineering." "Oh, that's cool. What company?" "Hartwell Construction." Her eyes widened. "Seriously? That's huge. My boyfriend works for a contractor that partners with them. What did you do there?" Before I could answer, Derek appeared with 3 colleagues trailing behind him. He had that corporate smile plastered on, the one that never reached his eyes. "Hey, Raymond," he said, and I noticed he didn't say, "Dad. These are some folks from the development team." The colleagues nodded politely. One of them, a guy named Travis with expensive glasses, asked, "How do you two know each other?" Derek laughed, that easy, dismissive laugh I'd heard too many times. "This is Raymond, the old guy I take care of. He lives in my guest house, just expenses, you know, but what can you do? Family's family, right?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face get hot, felt something crack open inside my chest. The colleagues laughed uncomfortably. Alyssa looked mortified, and Derek just stood there, grinning, completely unaware, or maybe just completely uncaring, that he'd just reduced his father to a punchline. Just expenses. I wanted to say something. Wanted to remind him that I'd paid for his college education, that I'd taught him to ride a bike and tie his shoes and treat people with dignity. But the words stuck in my throat, and instead, I just took a long drink of my beer and stared at the floor. "Excuse me," I said quietly, and walked away before anyone could see the tears threatening to form. I found the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, breathing hard, trying to compose myself. "You're being too sensitive," I told myself. He didn't mean it that way. But that was a lie. Derek had meant exactly what he said. To him, I was a burden, a relic, an old man who'd overstayed his welcome in his own son's life. When I came out, I seriously considered calling an Uber and just going home. But something stubborn in me, some last shred of pride, refused to slink away like a scolded dog. So I got another beer and positioned myself near the back of the room, determined to endure the next hour and then disappear from Derek's life as much as humanly possible. That's when Richard Hartwell walked in. I didn't see him at first. I was watching Derek hold court with some executives across the room, gesturing wildly, probably talking about quarterly projections or market disruption or whatever the hell mattered in his world. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. "Is that Raymond Mitchell I see hiding in the corner?" I turned, and there he was, Richard Hartwell, 74 years old, white hair immaculately combed, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He was grinning like he'd just found a winning lottery ticket. "Richard," I said, stunned, "what are you doing here?" "I'm on the board of this little tech outfit," he said, crossing the distance between us with his arms open. "But more importantly, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, he pulled me into a tight embrace, the kind of hug men of our generation don't usually give unless we really mean it. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I'd been holding clenched for months. "My God, Ray," Richard said, stepping back but keeping his hands on my shoulders. "You look good. Retirement treating you well?" "It's been an adjustment," I said carefully. "I bet. We're still trying to replace you, you know. Brought in 3 different guys. None of them have half your instinct." He shook his head. "You were the cornerstone, Ray. The whole operation ran differently after you left." People were starting to notice. A small crowd was forming, drawn by Richard's booming voice and obvious enthusiasm. I saw Derek on the periphery watching with a confused expression. "Come on," Richard said, guiding me toward the center of the room. "Let me tell these youngsters about the master at work." And then Richard Hartwell, founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar construction empire, started telling stories. He told them about the Kansas City project in 1998 when the lead contractor walked off the job and left us with a half-finished hospital and a city government ready to sue. How I'd stepped in, reorganized the entire workflow, brought the project in under budget and ahead of schedule. "Raymond didn't just manage projects," Richard said to the captivated audience. "He built people. Half the executives running construction firms in the Midwest right now, Ray trained them. Taught them not just how to read blueprints, but how to lead, how to solve problems, how to treat subcontractors and laborers with respect." I felt my face flush, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from something I hadn't felt in a long time, recognition, being seen. Richard told them about the Columbus expansion, the Detroit redevelopment, the training program I'd designed that became standard across the industry. He talked for maybe 10 minutes, and with every story, I watched my son's face change. The confident corporate smile faded. His skin went pale. He kept glancing at me, then at Richard, then back at me, like he was trying to reconcile 2 different people. "I tried everything to keep Ray from retiring," Richard concluded. "Offered him consulting fees, board positions, you name it, but he'd earned his rest. Best decision I ever made was hiring him 40 years ago. Worst decision was accepting his retirement." He turned to me. "Ray, you know we've got the Meridian project starting up in March. Hospital complex, massive undertaking. I don't suppose—" "Richard," I said, holding up a hand. I was overwhelmed, emotional, not ready to make any decisions. "Can we talk about this another time?" Of course, of course." He pulled out his phone. "Give me your number. Let's have lunch next week. I mean it." We exchanged numbers, and Richard worked the room for a few more minutes before excusing himself. As he left, he clapped me on the shoulder one more time. "The master," he said warmly. "Good to see you, Ray." The crowd dispersed slowly, but I could feel the shift. People were looking at me differently now. Alyssa came back over, eyes wide. "Holy crap," she whispered. "You're that Raymond Mitchell? My boyfriend talks about you. He says you're a legend." I didn't know what to say to that. Then Derek appeared at my elbow. His face was still pale, but now there was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like fear. "Dad," he said quietly. It was the first time he'd called me that all evening. I didn't know Richard Hartwell was going to be here. Neither did I. "He seems to think very highly of you." I looked at my son, really looked at him. Saw the expensive shirt, the carefully styled hair, the corporate armor he wore to hide whatever insecurities drove him, and I felt tired. So incredibly tired. "Derek," I said slowly, "I'm going to head home. I'll catch an Uber." No, I'll drive you. I didn't realize that I was a real person." The words came out sharper than I intended. "That I had a life before I became your expense?" His face flushed red. Dad, I didn't mean... Yes, you did. I set my empty beer bottle on a nearby table. You meant exactly what you said, and that's fine. I know where I stand. Can we just talk about this? Not tonight, I said. I was afraid if I stayed any longer, I'd say things I couldn't take back. Things that needed to be said, maybe, but not here. Not like this. I walked out of the Hotel Montclair into the freezing December night, requested an Uber on my phone. Patricia had taught me that before she died, and waited under the awning. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The guest house was dark when I got home. I sat at my small desk and stared at the crossword puzzle I'd abandoned that morning. 7 letters. The state of being worthy of respect. Dignity. I picked up my pen and filled it in. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. We need to talk tomorrow. I turned the phone face down and didn't respond. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the narrow bed of the guest house, staring at the ceiling, listening to the furnace kick on and off. Around 2 a.m, I got up and made coffee, sat at my desk and did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop and looked at my old files, blueprints, project timelines, photographs from job sites spanning 4 decades. There I was at 35, hard hat on, standing in front of the Kansas City Hospital frame. There at 48, shaking hands with the mayor of Columbus at a ribbon cutting. There at 59, surrounded by the team I'd trained, all of us muddy and exhausted and grinning after bringing in the Detroit project 2 weeks early. I'd forgotten. Somehow, in the 2 years since Patricia died, in the slow erosion of living in my son's guest house and trying not to be a burden, I'd forgotten who I was. The sun was coming up when Derek knocked on my door. I'd heard him leave for his morning run at 6. He was obsessively punctual about exercise, and now he stood on my small porch in his running gear, breathing hard, looking uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He'd barely set foot in this space since I moved in 18 months ago. He looked around now like he was seeing it for the first time. The narrow bed, the single chair, the mini fridge, the hot plate I used because I didn't want to invade his kitchen. This was where his father lived, 400 square feet of exile. "Coffee?" I offered. "No, thanks." Derek sat on the edge of my bed, the only place to sit besides my desk chair. He looked down at his hands. "Dad, about last night." "You don't need to apologize," I said, even though part of me desperately wanted him to. "Yes, I do." He looked up and I was surprised to see his eyes were red. What I said, how I introduced you, that was wrong. It was disrespectful and it was cruel and His voice cracked. "I didn't know about your career, about what you'd accomplished. You never talked about it. You never asked." The words hung in the air between us. Derek flinched like I'd slapped him. "That's fair," he said quietly. "That's absolutely fair." I poured myself more coffee, my back to him, trying to control the tremor in my hands. "Derek, do you know why I moved into this guest house? Because after Mom died, you needed help. The house was too much for you alone." I turned to face him. "No, I sold the house because I couldn't bear to be there without your mother. Every room had her in it. But I didn't need help, son. I needed family. I needed not to be alone with my grief. You offered the guest house, and I thought it meant you wanted me close. I did want..." "But you didn't want me," I continued, and now the words I'd been holding back for 18 months came flooding out. "You wanted the idea of doing the right thing. You wanted to tell people you'd taken in your widowed father, but you never wanted to actually know me, talk to me, include me in your life. I became furniture, Derek, worse than furniture. I became an expense you resented." Derek's face crumpled. "Dad, let me finish." My voice was shaking now, but I pressed on. "I let it happen. That's on me. I was so buried in grief after your mom died that I didn't have the energy to fight for my own dignity. I made myself small. I stayed out of your way. I pretended it didn't hurt when you called me Raymond instead of Dad, when you introduced me like I was some charity case instead of the man who raised you. I didn't realize..." "That's the problem, Derek. You didn't realize because you never looked. You never once asked me about my life, my work, what I did for 40 years before I retired. You just assumed that because I'm 66 and living in your guest house, I must be used up. Irrelevant, just waiting around to die." The silence that followed was devastating, Derek sat there with tears running down his face, and I stood holding my coffee mug, feeling simultaneously relieved and heartbroken. This was the conversation we should have had months ago, maybe years ago. "I'm sorry," Derek whispered. "God, Dad, I'm so sorry." I sat down in my desk chair, suddenly exhausted. "I know you are." "Richard Hartwell called me this morning," Derek said after a moment. "At 6 a.m. Wanted to know if I understood what an honor it was to have you as my father. He told me," Derek's voice broke again. "He told me that you were the most respected man he'd ever worked with, that you built your reputation on integrity and excellence in treating every person on a job site like they mattered. He asked me if I'd learned anything from you." "What did you say?" I didn't know what to say. I realized I couldn't name a single value you taught me, couldn't remember a single lesson because I'd spent my whole adult life too busy climbing my own ladder to look back and see where I came from. Derek wiped his face with his sleeve. "I'm ashamed. I'm so ashamed." I wanted to comfort him. That parental instinct never dies. But I also knew this pain was necessary. Sometimes people need to feel the full weight of their mistakes before they can change. "Derek, I need you to understand something," I said carefully. "I forgive you. I'm your father, and I love you, and I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You've spent 18 months making me feel worthless, and I can't just pretend that didn't happen because you're sorry now." "I know." "Richard offered me a consulting position, significant pay, flexible schedule, real work. I'm going to take it." Derek looked up sharply. That's great, Dad. Really. And I'm going to find my own place. A small apartment, maybe a condo, somewhere I can live with dignity instead of feeling like I'm taking up space in someone's charity. You don't have to do that. You can stay." "No," I said firmly. "I can't. This arrangement isn't healthy for either of us. You need your space and I need my self-respect." Derek nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling over. "I understand." "But," I continued, and I felt my voice soften, "I'd like to have dinner with you and Courtney once a week. Real dinner, where we talk, where you ask me questions and I ask you questions and we try to actually know each other. Because you're my son, Derek, and I don't want to lose you. But I can't keep living like this." "Yes," Derek said immediately. "Yes, whatever you want, whatever you need." We sat there in the early morning light, two men trying to find their way back to each other across a gulf of hurt and neglect and unspoken grief. It wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but it was a start. 3 weeks later, I met Richard for lunch at a steakhouse downtown. He slid a contract across the table, senior consultant for the Meridian Project, 20 hours a week, more money than I needed, but enough to make me feel valued. "This is generous, Richard," I said, scanning the terms. "It's what you're worth. And Ray, I'm not just offering this out of sentiment. I need you. The team needs you. This project's too important to trust to anyone less than the best." I signed the contract that afternoon. By the end of January, I'd found a 2-bedroom condo in Broad Ripple, a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and coffee shops and other people my age, walking dogs and living full lives. It had big windows, a small balcony, space for my desk and my files and all the parts of myself I'd packed away. Derek helped me move. He and Courtney both came, along with Courtney's brother Shane, and we spent a Saturday hauling boxes and assembling furniture. At one point, Derek found a framed photo of him at his college graduation, me and Patricia on either side of him, all of us beaming. "I forgot about this picture," Derek said softly. "Your mom loved that day," I told him. "She was so proud of you." "Were you? Proud of me?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw past the corporate armor to the boy who used to bring me his broken toys to fix, who used to fall asleep on my lap during Sunday football games. "Every single day," I said. "Even when I'm angry with you, even when you hurt me, I'm still proud. That doesn't just go away." Derek set the photo down carefully on my new bookshelf, and we went back to work. The Meridian Project started in March. I showed up to the first planning meeting in a hard hat and work boots I'd pulled out of storage, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Purposeful, needed, alive. The team was young, hungry, talented, but inexperienced. I spent my days doing what I'd always done best, teaching, guiding, solving problems nobody else could see coming. A young project manager named Kristen reminded me of myself at 30, brilliant but impatient, always pushing for faster results. I took her aside one afternoon after she'd snapped at a subcontractor. "Kristen, can I tell you something my first boss told me?" "Sure, Mr. Mitchell." "Call me Ray, And here it is. Every person on this site, from the electrician to the porter, has knowledge you don't have. Treat them like idiots and you'll miss the information that saves your project. Treat them with respect, and they'll move mountains for you. She absorbed that, nodded slowly. Thank you. You're going to be great at this, I said. You just have to remember that building things isn't just about concrete and steel. It's about people. Richard watched me work with something like satisfaction. Told you, he said one day as we reviewed blueprints. The master still has it. Every Wednesday night I had dinner with Derek and Courtney. Sometimes we talked about work. Derek had questions now, wanted to understand what I'd actually done all those years. Sometimes we talked about Patricia, and I shared stories he'd never heard. Sometimes we just sat and ate and existed together without the weight of resentment and hurt. It wasn't perfect. Derek still slipped sometimes, still got caught up in his own world and forgot to call. But when I pointed it out, he listened, he apologized, he tried. One Wednesday in late April, as Courtney was clearing dishes, Derek said, "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Would you be willing to talk to some of the younger guys on my team? Not about construction, but about leadership, about how to treat people, how to build something that lasts." I felt a swell of emotion in my chest. I'd be honored. "And Dad?" Derek's voice was quieter now. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you. Really see you. I wasted so much time." I reached across the table and gripped my son's hand. "We've got time now. That's what matters." On a Saturday morning in June, I stood on the balcony of my condo with my coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Joggers passed by. A young couple walked their golden retriever. An elderly woman tended her garden across the street. My phone rang. Derek. "Hey, Dad, what are you doing today?" "Nothing particular. Why?" "Courtney and I thought we'd come by. Maybe bring lunch, sit on your balcony, just hang out, if you're free." I smiled, feeling the morning sun warm on my face. "I'm free. Come on over." After we hung up, I stood there a while longer, thinking about Patricia. She would have loved this condo. Would have loved seeing Derek and me finding our way back to each other. Would have been proud that I'd stood up for myself, that I'd remembered who I was. I'd spent 2 years feeling like my life was over, like retirement and widowhood meant disappearing into irrelevance. But standing there that June morning, coffee in hand, important work ahead of me, my son on his way over, I realized something profound. I wasn't done. Not even close. The master still had work to do. And for the first time in a long time, I was grateful to be alive to do it. I walked out of the Hotel Montclair into the freezing December night, requested an Uber on my phone. Patricia had taught me that before she died, and waited under the awning. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The guest house was dark when I got home. I sat at my small desk and stared at the crossword puzzle I'd abandoned that morning. 7 letters. The state of being worthy of respect. Dignity. I picked up my pen and filled it in. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "We need to talk tomorrow." I turned the phone face down and didn't respond.